Hi everybody! Thanks for tuning in to this latest video. I know it's been a long time since my last one, but it ended up taking longer than I expected to really take stock of my surroundings and learn how people felt about Hollywood. And as you can guess from the title, today's video is about perceptions of Hollywood in Russia. So let's dive into it. Sorry for the location change, but I'm in my hotel in Moscow, so that's why I have this unfamiliar background behind me, not my usual walls. Anyway, so to start off about Hollywood in Russia, I first want to say that Hollywood movies are hugely popular here, as they are in probably most countries in the world, right? I especially see a lot of advertisements for superhero movies. So the Marvel movies are huge here. The Justice League is getting a lot of advertisement. And yeah, that's a particular area of Hollywood movies that people seem to especially demand here. Um, a couple months ago, I went to see the Bohemian Rhapsody movie, which I really enjoyed, which was dubbed into Russian, as is often done with Hollywood movies shown in Russia. I think some of the enjoyment comes from the ability to experience other parts of the world through Hollywood movies. If you live in Russia and don't necessarily have the option to travel, you get to see what, for example, American culture looks like in these movies. If you're Russian watching these movies, you might derive a lot of your stereotypes about Americans from these movies, from observing behavior of American characters. One interesting stereotype that I think comes from Hollywood movies that I've been asked about is whether Americans wear their shoes when they go inside and especially lie on their beds, which in Russia is considered pretty disgusting. I have to agree with that. Especially when you're coming up in from the rain or the mud and you lie on your nice clean bed and you get it dirty with your shoes. I don't think Americans do that, but for some reason that happens in movies, and so Russians tend to think that Americans do that too. So beyond the enjoyment, there's also a lot of, as you might imagine, ambivalence about Hollywood movies. These movies are seen as fun, but not necessarily as high quality. And Russians I talk to often view this low quality, kind of kitschy type of filmmaking to the high quality narratives that they used to see in Soviet film. And it's widely understood, for example, that Hollywood movies favor special effects and really glossy production value over substance, such as the deep philosophical questions, character development, and compelling storytelling that is often associated with Soviet film. While people do enjoy Hollywood movies, they are also often viewed as corrupting contemporary Russian filmmaking, as filmmakers in Russia try their best to emulate the special effects and the production value that they see in Hollywood movies, especially in the interest of attracting younger audiences. Many people perceive this as a kind of sacrifice of what was perceived as effective storytelling in Russian and Soviet film before, what made that film culture special. This is one example, I would say, of a globalization of one form of mass media that's actually flattening some of the local film cultures that have existed in the world. And I don't know if that's the case in other parts of the world, but in Russia, that's arguably the case. Another source of ambivalence about Hollywood films is about the worldview that Hollywood films espouse. Obviously, Hollywood is a reflection of American perspectives because Hollywood movies are made in America by Americans, often to tell American stories. Hollywood movies tend to tell a very Americentric story of historical events such as World War II, which Russia, I think, rightfully sees themselves as playing a central, if not the central role in. And so to see movies like Saving Private Ryan, for example, which show America to be the single-handed victors of World War II and saviors of the world, I think can create some tension with Russian viewers, or at least some questions. Russians that I talk to often notice that they are not necessarily portrayed in the most flattering light in American film, and I think enduring stereotypes of Russians as evil or criminal exist today still, and I think some of that is carryover from Cold War movies in which Russians were, of course, portrayed as duplicitous spies and communists and all the rest, right? And then there are other sources of tension that are a little harder to pin down into single sources. And I think the best way to illustrate this is to talk about when I went to see Bohemian Rhapsody here in Novosibirsk. Not here in Novosibirsk, back in Novosibirsk. For me, when I saw Bohemian Rhapsody, I was watching the movie alongside people who had enormous respect for Freddie Mercury. He's enormously popular as a singer and a just musical idol here. But when I went in to see the movie, I had my passport checked at the ticket stand to check that I wasn't underage, because the content of the film related to Freddie Mercury's sexuality triggers the propaganda laws here about the spreading of homosexual ideologies to young people. So I had my passport checked. And when I was inside the movie, people were oohing and eyeing at the wonderful vocals, the recreation of Live Aid, all the great ways they recreated scenes in those movies. But when scenes came up specifically related to Freddie Mercury's gay relationships or specifically to gay sex, there was uncomfortable laughter, which I think wouldn't necessarily not be there if I saw the movie in the US either. But that made me think that alongside this reverence for this musical idol, there was also discomfort. And so I think this kind of encapsulates some of what it's like for Russians to consume Western media, that alongside the enjoyment, there can be some real cultural and often political friction that is part of the film viewing experience. But this friction at the end of the day doesn't stop people from watching these movies or enjoying them. And watching movies is a really personal experience. So really every single Russian person has a different experience of watching Hollywood movies. So I take everything I say with a grain of salt. These are just my impressions. The ambivalence that I described in Russian audiences watching Hollywood movies is not even unique to Hollywood movies. The same Russians that I talked to who had reservations about Hollywood movies are also happy to criticize Russian-made movies, albeit for different reasons. I also want to note that I think the perception of Hollywood may be changing, or at least diversifying, to reflect the increasing diversity of Hollywood films themselves. And I think people here are increasingly cognizant of the fact that American filmmakers are equally capable of making Marvel flicks as they are films that defy the stereotype of the Hollywood blockbuster. One Russian guy even told me about how much he loved the movie Moonlight, which is a movie about a gay black man. And you might not expect that in Russia. The increasing representation in Hollywood of groups beyond the mold of the straight white male, too, I think is also helping to shift Russian consumption of American media too. So thank you guys for waiting. I know this was a long time in the making, but I enjoy doing these videos, and I hope to be doing them more frequently now that I know a little bit more to talk about. So thank you again for your patience, and I hope to have another video ready for you soon.